Almighty has been blessed you and protect you for your spiritual and physical well-being during these difficult times. Today, we are hosting this webinar because we see there's an opportunity because of COVID-19 to rethink and explore both theoretical and underpinnings and practical implications of Islamic jurisprudence. Our fiqh, or Islamic jurisprudence, is universal, authentic, and penetrating, is supposed to cover all fields and levels. It should cover all conditions and necessary conditions. So the current crisis, I think, also we'd like to hear from you and learn from you that we're also going to, this our fiqh, we're also going to say and give a guidance about Muslim practices and lives during this time. So our rationale here is to balance the preciousness of the human life and the dignity of faith in such a time. It is a great reminder that morality to preserve life, ethics to respect public safety must be considered as important as, if not more important, ahead of the rituals, legal codes of our religious life. So because of this, we invite all of you, prominent legal scholars and imams, to share and together with the World Muslim Community Council to take the initiative, explore, discuss, and deliberate the new requirement and the horizons of Islamic jurisprudence. Today, we're going to have 2 sessions. Before we go into the academic discussion, let's welcome His Excellency, Dr. Ali Rashid Al-Noami, Chairman of the World Muslim Community Council, and he's prominent both academician and successful statesman for the country we are in now, the United Arab Emirates. And he also has a recent book on the national state, which will be published in English soon. Let's welcome Dr. Ali to give us opening remarks. Thank you.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala nabina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Thank you, Dr. Yusuf. First of all, I'd like to thank all of you, brother and sister, to be part of this. Although we, the world, all humanity are facing challenges, but also we see through these challenges, there is opportunity. And Alhamdulillah, we are blessed to be in Ramadan, Ramadan Kareem, Ramadan Mubarak to all of you. And we see that, during this Ramadan, that we used to come together and we feel that we are spiritual in a very special spiritual status. So I hope that that all of you are safe, your family are safe, your loved one are safe. When it comes to talking about such a theme, actually we need as Muslim to come forward and to speak up, not only to Muslim but to the world, that our religion is very flexible when it comes with dealing with the crisis that face humanity, not only face Muslims. And here I'd like to thank many of you who actually took this challenge and look into opportunity and started serving their community. We saw in many cases that many Muslim community were actively engaged in serving the large community. We saw that many Muslim physicians, public figures, volunteer started actually making a huge impact on their community, the large community, serving Muslim and non-Muslim to save lives. So I really praise all of you for doing so and encourage you to do more, because this is the real response that we Muslims have against Islamophobia. This is what we can do to show the real Islam, that we do care about others, and that saving lives is a priority in Islam. When it comes to the pandemic that we are facing and the fatwa that we need in different parts of the world. Actually, we are facing a special case. So in this, we need special fatwa also to deal with these challenges. And this is where I encourage you to engage together, engage in a dialogue that will serve the community. Don't leave a vacuum where your follower, all those Muslims will look for someone else, and might misguide them actually. So I encourage you to engage together, look into Sharia, what's the right fatwa, and always bear in mind what Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, his methodology and strategy. Aisha radiallahu anha, in the hadith, she said, in al-Bukhari, ما خير رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم بين أمرين إلا اختار أيسرهما. ما لم يكن إثما. Whenever the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he was a choice either to choose between something easy and easier, he always chose the easier one for the public, for the Muslim. So I encourage you to look into this, serve your community, and if you have any issue face you in this and a challenge, please refer to us. We can engage you and connect you with some of our ulama who can help you in delivering the right fatwa that will serve the community that you are living in. I wish you a very successful session, and excuse me because I have another commitment that I have to go to. Thank you very much and wish you the best.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ali, for his wonderful opening remarks. Thank you very much. We wish for the successful event of next ones. Okay, we will now start the first session, which is called Islamic jurisprudence on pandemics. The human condition and the social conditions we live now because of the COVID-19 push us to renew and restore or reactive the height of our faith by considering if we can think a new possibility that morality, jurisprudence, ethics, rituals can be balanced to serve both our life, our deen, and our community, as these are all the essence of Islam. The teachings, rituals, and the creed we practice as Muslims could both contribute to the moral and ethical achievement of individuals and society at large. Thus, we want you to explore the epistemologically and theoretically to see how Islamic jurisprudence can be rethought, reoriented because of the pandemic. Not just only to explain what pandemics, what pandemics bring to us, or what we should adapt to the pandemic requirement. But it is more to think Islamic jurisprudence as a whole. Okay. So now, does Dr. Okay. So we are waiting. Our first speaker is Dr. Qutb. We'll wait for him to come. He's praying his asr. Inshallah, he'll join us. So now we move to speaker Sheikh Razwan Muhammad. Sheikh Razwan Muhammad is a Sunni theology and a scholar, a graduate in geopolitics and Arabic from University of Glasgow. In 1993, he left to travel and study with a wide area of leading scholars and theologians in various countries in the Muslim world. In the process, he studied the Turkish language at the University of Ankara, and also he did other Islamic training at that university. He graduated from the Fatih Islamic Law College in Damascus, graduated from the prestigious 6-year program with distinguished merit, achieving overall first position in his year of graduate from the college. Now, he's serving his community in Glasgow. He's guiding a very important initiative called Islamic Syllabus. He's the education director there. and he has been appeared in many media and public events, and he also was awarded as the Muslim of the Year in the UK in 2014. So let's welcome Sheikh Razwan to share with his insight with us.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Jazakallah khair al-jaza, inshallah. Thank you for inviting me, and gratitude to the other contributors to this, inshallah, very beneficial event to talk about some of the issues around the pandemic. The current pandemic obviously is a worldwide, by its very nature, by its very definition, is a worldwide pandemic, and the implications of this to our day-to-day lives in terms of the way that we're structuring society, the way that economics is working, the way that societies are operating is obviously unprecedented, and it's also exceptional. And that's not to belittle previous events that have happened in human history, but this is very much a new set of circumstances that I think the human community in general has to navigate in some way, which is going to be slightly different from the way that we've navigated previous issues related to war and peace, related to illnesses or even plagues. And I think in terms of our own interaction with Islamic law and Islamic theology, it brings up a lot of very, very important, very interesting, and I think unique questions to the table that perhaps will allow us to perhaps recalibrate our theology and our application of Islamic law. So essentially, what I wanted to do was to actually share with you some observations, a couple of points. I think I've got 4 major points that I want to kind of go through, and for want of being, in a sense, prepared for this to be structured, I want to go from concrete discussions to abstract discussions. I want to go from the real discussions that are implemented and applied in terms of Islamic law and the way that the communities are operating and ordering themselves in Muslim countries and non-Muslim countries as well. Obviously, I'm from Scotland, which is a minority Muslim population within a majority non-Muslim population. You could include to that America, France, Germany. There's numerous places. In fact, the majority of, if not perhaps a large minority of Muslims, in fact, live in minority contexts anyway. And so it's quite interesting that we navigate this not just from the perspective of majority Muslim countries such as, United Arab Emirates or Egypt or Pakistan, but we also look at it from the perspective of a minority. So I want to go from concrete to abstract. And I think the first thing that is interesting about the recalibration of Islamic law and our view of theology is the conceptualization of sovereignty and power and authority, essentially. Because in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala always mentions this idea of in al-hukmu illa lillah, that indeed the sovereignty, absolute sovereignty is something that belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. And that means, scholars in the past have discussed the theoretical underpinnings of that. Does that mean that God decides what's right and wrong? Does God essentially dictate the rules of inheritance and religious observations and economic contracts and marital law? Or does it mean something more interesting and more deep? And what's interesting in this pandemic is that the question of sort of sovereignty and where power actually lies has become very, very prominent. And, Carl Schmitt's a very famous German legal theorist who lived in the beginning of the last century. He drafted the Weimar Constitution. And he said that the sovereign, if you want to know who the sovereign is and where ultimate power lies, you look at the power or authority that rules in the case of an exception. And in this situation, the exceptional situation that we have is also unprecedented. And so what we've found is you've had a kind of a meeting of minds between Muslim scholars, and you've also had the scientific community who've provided data and projections for the specific pandemic. And then you have the governments and the rulers who are, in a sense, looking at wider considerations about economic growth, about the ability to order society at a time of illness and pandemics. And so each of these groups, Muslim scholars, they have a specific interest, which essentially is for people to live a religious life, which does not necessarily mean that they ignore other aspects of human existence, such as economic issues or issues related to medical illnesses. But essentially, there is a focus. There has been seemed to be a focus on religious issues. The scientific community has really been, moved and led by the facts and the scientific projections that they have, and the rulers have their own understanding. So the concept of sovereignty is something that's become very clear in this current context, where I think the people that have taken the lead are essentially the scientific community. They have lobbied governments and rulers who have then implemented rulings, and then the scholars have had to, in a sense, this is quite unfortunate, they've had to kind of catch up with this whole discussion later on. And I know in my own country, in the UK, it's been unfortunate that that a large group of Muslim scholarship has slightly delayed in its response to this issue, whereas I would have felt that the religious underpinnings of our faith would have made us at the forefront of this whole discussion. The second point is it provides an interesting intersection between the private religious life of the community and also the public temporal authority issues. And in Islamic law, the idea of sovereignty is important. And one of the qawa'id, legal maxims that come up in Islamic law are حكم الحاكم يرفع الخلاف. That when there's a difference of opinion on what to do and people are arguing and debating what the best course of action is, حكم الحاكم يرفع الخلاف. Essentially, that the ruler and the ruler's judgment on an issue removes any semblance of difference of opinion amongst the population. In other words, if there's numerous possible options and the ruler says that there's one option that needs to be taken, and in the pandemic situation, it's been lockdown in the majority of Muslim countries, that essentially puts to an end any legal, ethical, moral wrangling over what needs to be done, because authority lies essentially there. And in Islamic law, it's well known, if you study Islamic law, you'll find numerous situations where this is enshrined within our specific constitutional law. There's instances where, in the case of a fire, for example, scholars have specifically stated that the ruler has the right to destroy private property if he feels, or the authorities feel, that it will stop the spread of the fire. And so you have that, and you also have what Imam Muhammad ibn Hassan al-Shaybani relates, which is that if there is an issue of difference amongst people, and the leader commands to something which is one of the options, then it's an obligation to obey the leader. And so this brings up this idea of the sovereignty within a specific area of the public and private, which essentially refocuses and recalibrates the way that Islamic law essentially will move into in the future. And what it does do at the same time is something that Ibn Qayyim mentioned, and he mentioned this in his I'lam al-Muwaqqi'een, which is a very amazing book on Islamic legal theory and the application of that. He mentions that Islamic law is all about compassion, all about mercy, all about justice, all about balance. And if you find that a person calls towards something which is imbalanced, which is against mercy, which is against justice, then you can know, he says, that clearly that is not part of the Islamic faith, even if people label it as being religious, even if the person who comes is in the garb of a religious cleric, even if the person is giving quote unquote a fatwa. Essentially, that action, that process of saying that it's religious while it's going against the very wisdom of Islamic law undermines its claim to be religious. And this is not something that's specific to the Muslim community or religious morality within the Islamic scope of things. Maimonides, who is the famous physician of Salahuddin Ayyubi, he was he's basically the person that revived and restructured Jewish theology and law. He lived during the time of the Mamluks. He said that a law, for it to be considered to be divine in origin and to be of a nature which is declaratively part and parcel of divine wisdom, it has to be for the benefit of mankind. It has to be there specifically and essentially for the human benefit. And that comes back to my third point, which is this pandemic and the context within which we're living gives us an opportunity, perhaps in the Islamic faith and amongst the religious establishment and scholars, to recalibrate the relationship of Islamic law in terms of its constituent parts. And what I mean by that is Islamic law is made up of different areas of law. You've got the usul al-fiqh, which is a kind of constitutional high-level principles that guide how you come up with religious rulings. And on the other extreme, you have fiqh, which is, as Imam Juwayni says, معرفة الأحكام الشرعية التي طريقها الاجتهاد. It's essentially the knowledge of rulings of law which are arrived at through independent legal thinking, which essentially means that it's possible to disagree upon these issues. You know, the Hanafi school may disagree with the Shafi'i school in a specific point. And what you'll know is in fiqh, there are differences and they're innumerable. There's so many differences amongst the schools on issues on how to pray, how to fast, how to contract legal documents, how to, contract a marriage. There's differences and they're well known. But what happens in this kind of exceptional situation of a pandemic, and what happens in the unprecedented call to scholars to think outside the box, is that you're able to now recalibrate the relationship between the usul, which is a kind of overarching principles, and the actual specific rulings that we give. And what happens in that process is you end up, as we have seen during the pandemic, having recourse to what are called qawa'id al-fiqhiyya, which are these kind of overarching universal principles that are essentially rules of thumb that allow Muslims to second guess what the course of action should be in a specific situation, because fiqh essentially can get it wrong. And I want to kind of make that point very clear. In following the detail of law, or the detail of, say, for example, the obligation of having to establish the Jum'ah prayer, and the obligation of having to establish the Hajj pilgrimage, and obviously we know that it's not decided what will be happening with that. The obligation of, all of these things, and the sunnah nature of the Taraweeh, and the obligation of keeping mosques open, for example, for public worship. All of these are issues of specific rulings of fiqh. And where the recalibration takes place is when the details of Islamic law come into contradiction with the universals of our faith, which are enshrined within what we call the qawa'id. The qawa'id are essentially the patterns of Islamic law, the pathways of Islamic law that tell us essentially what is the pathway that we need to take in a specific situation, and not get misdirected by a specific legal ruling in a book. And this is related to also what Imam Shatibi says, and others like Imam Juwayni have talked about, which is the kulliyat al-khams, so the 5 universal principles of Islamic law, which are essentially the things that Islam protects and preserves. Islam protects them and promotes them, in fact, as well, such as wealth, religion, intellect, property. So all these things are things that Islam protects. So it protects life, it protects religion, it protects wealth, it protects a person's honor, but it also promotes these as well. And what's interesting is this pandemic has allowed us to almost create a sort of a case study, an exceptional case study, where we are able now to look at the priorities of Islamic law. Where do they lie? Do they lie in preserving religion? Do they lie in preserving life? Do they lie in preserving intellect? Do they lie in preserving other things such as wealth? And essentially what happens is you find that we can now revisit the fact that, like Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu suspended the Had legislation and rulings related to theft, which is to preserve wealth, in a situation where essentially people didn't have enough to eat, and people in a sense were going through intense famine, and in a sense were at the point where they could have lost their lives due to hunger. And Sayyidina Umar removed this ruling, which is essentially a religious ruling, for the benefit of allowing people to survive. And this is also something that Ibn Qudama al-Maqdisi radiallahu anhu mentions in his Mughni, which is that, it's also part of Islamic law that you suspend the application of specific laws such as Had in a situation such as conflict with another country, such as a legal war that's going on, because of the fact that preserving life is more important than applying religious rulings. And so what happens is you have this idea of prioritizing what is important. And what we find is the golden rule in Islamic law is the priority of removing harm, because that type of harm, such as the loss of life and the spread of a contagious disease, is something that cannot be offset by something in the future. If somebody dies, they die, and you cannot, in a sense, bring them back. But if you miss, in fact, the Tarawih, there's always something to replace it. If you miss Hajj this year, there's something to replace it. If you miss Jum'ah, there's something to replace it. So in Islam, what's interesting is harm is removed, and always you find in Islamic laws, you have something to take its place if it's an act of worship. But preserving life, preserving order is something that is an absolute, because it underpins safe and secure societies. And so that's very important. And so it lets us, almost have a thought experiment where we can imagine what would the Salaf, the early Muslims, the companions do. And what I think you would be very clear for us is that they would do the common sense thing, which is what happened during the plague of Amwas, where the Umar radiallahu anhu and others, they refused to go into places which were affected by the plague, and the people that were in the places with plague were told not to leave. And this is part and parcel of the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the last thing I think, which is the most abstract, this is the four things I wanted to talk about, was the theological kind of outpouring from this, the kind of outcomes that are theological in nature, that in a sense will also impact the way that we rule and the way that we apply fiqh in the context of our own situation. And that's to do with this age-old problem of the question of evil and the theology related to that. And essentially the theology then relates also to the impact on how we act upon this. And there's probably just one main point, which is, people are questioning the fact that this is something that is perhaps divinely ordained. This is perhaps underwritten by divine decree, that God is in some way wanting this to happen. And they will quote, إِنَّمَا أَمْرُهُ إِذَا أَرَادَ شَيْئًا أَن يَقُولَ لَهُ كُن فَيَكُونَ, famous verse in the Quran that is oft repeated, that indeed the affair with God is if he wants something to happen, he says, kun fayakun, it happens. So is there a pleasure in God in allowing this to happen? I think this is where the question of evil and what is playing out here is important, is that these things, bima kasabat aydin nas, is very important. These are things that we have, in a sense, preempted or precipitated. And, the origin of this coronavirus and COVID-19 is very clearly situated within wet markets in a specific country. Why do people eat those types of animals, and why is there a crossover between wild animals and the human food chain? You go back to the great leap forward in China in the 60s, where the Communist Party attempted to implement and impose communist rule and basically nationalize large farmlands, which led to such poverty that 30 million people died. The people that didn't die ended up having to eat animals that no society considered to be edible. And essentially that led to poverty. And now it's led to a whole series of viruses that are coming out of essentially a disregard for essentially what human societies understand to be natural and healthy eating patterns. And I think so, therefore, it puts this idea of the onus on action. You can't just say it's a decree of God and therefore we leave it. It's also placed the onus upon us to then act proactively to, in a sense, mitigate and also to stop that sort of thing happening. So these are 4 points I wanted to bring out. The first is the concept of sovereignty. The second was intersection between public authority and private religious life. The third, which was most important, was a recalibration of Islamic law in the context of a pandemic. The last was theology and the imperatives that relate to how we understand the world and how that will impact, inshallah, to the way that we use our fiqh in the future. So Jazakallah khair al-jazak. That was some points I think that were important in the context of the COVID discussion and Islamic law and theology. And hopefully, inshallah, your listeners have found it beneficial. Jazakallah khair al-jazak.
Thank you very much, Sheikh Radwan. I think your excellent 4 points really benefit this webinar and our audience a lot for us to rethink of Islamic rules in response to the pandemic. Thank you so much.
Exactly.
Our next speaker will be His Excellency Dr. Qutb Mustafa Sano. He is the Minister in charge of Diplomatic Affairs and the Diplomatic Advisor to the President of the Republic of Guinea. Dr. Sano has served as a Minister of International Cooperation from 2011 to 2016 and as a Minister of Religious Affairs from 2009 to 2011. Dr. Sano is also a professor. He served as a Deputy Rector for Internationalization and Innovation at the International Islamic University in Malaysia from 2005 to 2009. So since 2014, he has served in the fiqh, the subject of our discussion today. So he has been the Vice President of the Council of the International Academy of Jurisprudence, fiqh Academy at the ORC. And he was also Professor of Comparative Jurisprudence, Muqasid Sharia, and Islamic Finance of International Islamic University of Malaysia for 16 years. Now let's welcome Professor Doctor and His Excellency Minister Sano to share his thought on the subject. Professor Sano, can you open your mic? And yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all of you, and Ramadan Mubarak to you. I'm happy to see Sheikh Hamid, a good friend of mine that we met a few months ago in Los Angeles. This is Malibu. Thank you very much, our learned Iswan, yourself. Indeed, it is a great moment, a great opportunity for me to share with you a few ideas related to this Islamic, what do you call it, the future of Islamic jurisprudence. You may want to talk about the future of every single thing, the world after, before Corona, COVID-19, and the world after COVID-19. It's not only at the economic level, neither is on the political level. It is even the theoretical and the theological level. You will talk about the jurisprudence and all the things will be needed for all of us to be more relevant to the society, more relevant to the realities we are living. Islam wants us to be relevant. Why we want to be relevant? Because we need to be part of the world that we are living with it. And we have to be relevant to that world. If you are not relevant, so we need to say you will not be able to carry on your dawah business, you will not be able to carry on Islam activities, you'll be always just like be left behind, which is needed today for Islamic jurisprudence. You may allow me to talk about tajdeed. My area of concentration, specialization is about usul al-fiqh. I have had the chance, by the grace of the Almighty, to write a few, more than 200, more than, what do you say, the 20 books about Islamic usul al-fiqh, right? Basically about each ijtihad and Islamic finance. What I have learned from this crisis, this pandemic, that our Islamic jurisprudence needs to be revitalized, and they need to be more, not to go for the revision or not to go for review, but we want it to be more dynamic. A dynamization of our Islamic brother Nuswan was talking about legal maxims. You may want to be, could you allow me, I just want to say the new paradigm that we'll have to be going through from analytical deduction, and then we have to go for the holistic approach right now. Because the crisis that we are faced with, what will you call it, the qiyas? Qiyas means to you, you must have a past case, and then you have a new case. You would say the past and new case you meet somewhere. What do you call the effective code, al-illa? And then you will give the legal ruling of the past case to the new case. The situation right now is above that things. The cases that we are having right now in front of us, they don't have past. Then you cannot get any past case that you want to take it to be the basic for the new cases that we have to get. What we need to go for it, you have to go for me, we call it assumption, at least this happen. where you will be going through the general rulings. You will be going general principles of Islamic jurisprudence. Usul al-Amma. And that one, it is flexible. It has been said in the way that the fuqaha, they have gone through and then they built what we do have today in our hands. We call it usul, what do you call it? Usul al-fiqh al-Islami or usul fiqh al-madhahib al-Islami. For instance, I will just want to give an example. In the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, whatever would rate it, وَحَلَّ اللَّهُ الْبَيْعَ وَحَرَّمَ الرِّبَى. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has permitted the transaction and had prohibited the riba. For instance, for somebody from a student of Usul al-Fiqh, when you take the word of al-bay', it is this is the al-jins. It is saying all the transactions, not only the one which were around when the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the transaction known to the Sahaba, the community of Sahaba, the transactions which were known later on by the companions and the Tabi'i, and then the transaction for nowadays. So you do not need to go when you want to look at the principles about the legal ruling for a new transaction today to say, is it that transaction was known to our learned scholars before? No, I will just look at the transaction. Do we have the pillars of a contract? Do we have the conditions of that need to be fulfilled in the contract? When I get it, let it be share market, let it be companies we have this today, let it be any new transaction that had been brought before us, and then we will have to look if we do have all the pillars of transactions in that one. The same thing too for riba. The riba that the Jahili time, the people were practicing, it's not exactly the same thing what is happening today. But you may have something which is the meaning why the riba was prohibited itself. Anything you have to go for the injustice, anything you have to go, not the sharing of the profit, you share the profit, but you don't share the losses, then Islam come out to say, no, I'm giving you broader understanding of my instruction, my principles, my teachings. So when you take the usul al-amr, anything is happening today, you will find some of the asal in the Quran or hadith of Rasulullah. For instance, I just came out now from a conference with the Nadwa al-Barakah. There was something about the impact of COVID on transactions. Somebody has, you booked the airline, you booked the ticket, you booked the hotels, and or you paid for the school fee for your children, and it happened of sudden. Now, you cannot make use of the ticket that you bought, or you cannot make use of the booking that you have made it in the hotel. So what to do? Are we going to ask the hotel managers and hotel people that have to take the airlines, please pay back the people's money as they are not able to do? If you want to do this, Islam has given you, or Islamic jurisprudence have taught us how to go about it and how to get the answer to all the questions what we are going through. For instance, the usul al-amma, the general principles of Islam, are flexible because they were meant for all the times, for all the people, for all the era, for all places. It's not just only for people here. When I say "Kul man harrama zinata Allah," or "Kul ya bani Adam khudhu zinatakum inda kulli masjid." When you talk about zina, Ali be here the general. Anything you call it zina, it's not just specific. Islam didn't want to go into details to give you specific. Should you take the tiles? Should you have, this is the big one? Should you have my, you have it. Just left it with your community, with your reality, with your custom, which is very important because Islam wants us to be not a religion for a region, not a religion for a specific people, not a religion for a specific time, but it's for all, and it's forever, and it will be for all of the places that we'll be going and all the time that we'll be going through. The flexibility of Islam will not be seen if you have to go on this analogical deduction. The comprehensiveness of Islam, you will not get it clearly if you really insisting on this, if you are not going for the holistic approach, where you will be having the answers to all the questions that have been raised today. These are the questions that you will not be going to, you don't blame Abu Hanifa if he couldn't answer you, or you don't blame Imam Malik if he couldn't answer you, he couldn't get for you an answer. You don't blame Abu Ahmad, you don't blame Shafi'i, because they are not living, they did never live these things and never expected it to happen in the future. But you should blame yourself if you really do not want to move on, and then you don't want to move forward. And if you want to continue to be living in the past, if you want to continue to say, to believe, I have to get the past to help me to solve the problem of my present. And then you will have to be blamed because you do not want to move, you do not want to walk, you do not want to think for yourself, you do not want to think for your realities, you do not want to think for what is happening today. For instance, I'm giving an example in the Maliki school. It is not allowed for Muslims, those times the school was saying, at one time, the Malik time, you can't have a dog in your house. They were saying, al-kalb lil-hiratha, walaysa lil-hirasa. So the dog was meant, if you are going for hunting, there you get along with you the dog. Dog was, at those days, in the time of Asad ibn al-Fura, one of the learned Maliki schools in Tunisia and Morocco area, he was having a very big dog with him in his house. So, you could say, like Sheikh Amin now, you good Muslim, how can you have a dog in your house? You are a learned scholar. And the Imam Malik said this and this. And then he just looked at them. لو كان مالك حيا لاتخذ أسدا ضرارا. You people, you did not get Malik rightly. You got it wrongly. If the Malik was living the time I'm living now, he won't get only dog, he was going to get the lion with him. Because he was just reflecting the security that is needed to be that one there. You need the dog to have it with you. It's not because of anything. Malik did not say when he said that one, because the time the Malik was living, there was no such need to have this at that time. So what we would learn from this one, your realities should not be just brought it outside of your realities and get the answer to it outside of your realities. Your reality in the Muslim communities in these places, you should be thinking for your own realities. You should be thinking for your own, what do you call it, problems that we are through, for the crisis that we are going through. And you definitely, believe me, you will get the answer from Islam. Islam is a beautiful, is a flexible, is very open one. It's just Allah God does not want to make a boundary, or does not want to make it difficult for you people. You need to become Yusuf. He wants it to be more easy for you because it has to go along with your life. It's not just for 2 days or 3 days, I will finish my religion. No, it is something has to go for, and it has to be flexible, and it has to be something that I'm able to do it. That's why it's not allowed in Islam when you feel sleepy. Don't force. You want to sleep. You want to pray. You want to read the Quran. No, get to sleep. Sleeping is a worship because it will give you energy. When you are not able to do some of the things that don't make sense, you are hungry. You need to eat. Just eat. Eating is a worship in Islam. When you want this thing to drink, it's all the things that worship. So when you look at the worship itself in a very narrow manner, you will just resume it in prayers or in reciting the Quran. You forget excelling in your work, being the best physicians in your place, the best economists in the place, even the best politician in your place. This is a worship. It is a part of the worship. As Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam saw even وَفِي بُضِعِ أَحْدِكُمْ صَدَقَةً. Could you imagine the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam saying that when you get, you answer to the call of the nature, you get the marital relationship with your own wife. That one, do you worship? You'll be rewarded for that one. And the companions got shocked. Somebody is responding to his or her desire. Is going to be rewarded for this. And Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, if it happened that he did not go through the legal way, he did not have this thing with his own wife, with his husband, her own husband, what is going to happen? Is it going to be punished? Is it going to be sinful? The Prophet, they said, yes. Say then, if he is going to be sinful by doing sin, he has to be rewarded by doing something which is good, which is not sinful. So the first thing for me also, let us make use of the principles, the general principle, al-usul al-amma li Sharia Islam. When you take this one, the Quran, do not just relate it, like some people when you say, إن الله يبعث على رأس كل 100 عام من يجدد لها أمر دينها. Later on, men, God, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in one of hadith, there will be every 100 years, God will send somebody to be mujaddid. Now, the learned scholars area, they were talking about one single mujaddid. Why they were saying so? Because it's man to them is one person. Just like reality, this was their interpretation, their understanding. But we have learned later on that mujaddid is not necessarily to be only one person. It could be institution, it could be people, it could be a country, it could be a nation, it could be civilization. Because man in Arabic is a mawsul. Man means to say it could be one person, could be lady, could be man, could be woman, could be 3 people, could be 10 people, could be a country. يسبح لله من في السماوات سبح لله من في السماوات ومن في الأرض وله من في السماوات ومن في الأرض. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in many of the verses of the Quran, man was not being just only for one person. That's why they would say, Hanafi school will tell you who is the mujaddid of Qarn al-Thalith. Shafi'i will tell you who is mujaddid. Hanbali will tell you who is the mujaddid according to the school. But to me, they are all together are mujaddid. And not them being mujaddid for Shafi'i, another mujaddid for Hanafi or Hanbali, it should be accepted as mujaddid. You should have people today, you could be mujaddid where you are. If you are able today to help Islam and the Muslims to be more relevant to their society, you must be relevant. And to be relevant, you must be part of the society. You must be part of the decision maker. You must be part of whatever is happening in that society. You have to take whatever you could do to make sure that you'll be relevant to your society. The second thing where we have to move for it, in order for us to deal with our realities, we have our learned brothers, Ruswan has spoken about legal maxims. Legal maxims, it is legacy for Muslims today. You may have in any other school of law, you talk about it, but Islamic jurisprudence is a very rich one. For instance, they talk about 5 basic, you call it the big one, the 5 big legal maxims that is considered to be the basic of all the other maxims. Al-umur bi-maqasidiha. Everything depends on what do you call it, the intention. And then you have al-mashaqqatu tajlibu taysir. The hardship will call the easiness. La darara wa la dirara. Do not harm anybody. Nobody shouldn't be harming you. Al-adatu muhakkama. Al-adatu muhakkama. The custom is of force that you have to refer to the custom from time to time. And then al-yaqinu la yazulu bi-shakka. When something, the certainty cannot be removed by doubt. So when you take out of this, the Muslims throughout the history, they developed more than 100 legal maxims. And these 100 legal maxims, very unfortunately today, are not being utilized. We have just kept them with us in our library. And then we should just let, when you get them, believe me, you could get the answer to everything that we are going through. I was just talking to our learned scholars just now in the conference for Jeddah. I told them, when you talk about what will jawahir, qa'idatul jawahir, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the pandemic, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam had made it clear. من باع لأخيه ثمرا ثم أتته جائحة يجب أن ترد إليه ماله. قال أتأكل مال أخيك بغير حق. So if it happened that a pandemic, we have got into transaction, and while we are going for it and a pandemic happened, I should not be blaming you. You should not be blaming me. But Allah will want us to say, to accept the pandemic as a trial from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as a test from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then we need to share it. You should not just be saying, I have to continue to pay your hotel. I have to continue to pay the ticket that I bought. I have to continue to go for the transactions that have been done for it. You should accept, and I should accept, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted to test all of us. So these legal maxims should be to you, for you today, a source of force, a source to make you relevant. For instance, when you take the qaida la darara wa la dirara, it is hadith in the basic, but you have many qaida darurat tubihu al-mahdhurat, al-darurat tuqaddaru biqadariha, al-amr idha daqa ittasa, with ittasa daq, and then you got all of the things. Daru al-mafasid muqaddam ala jalb al-masalih, and you will have enhanced a legacy, you will have enhanced something very, very rich one that could make use of it to solve the problems that we are faced with it. For instance, al-darurat tubihu al-mahdhurat, which is a well-known legal maxim to all Muslims. It is the time now to make use of it, not to abuse it, but you need them because we are living in the time which is a both even with darurat. Because Jaya is going beyond this darurat one. And it's just changing the whole setting, the whole legal rulings that we have been having for. Who could imagine that Muslims be told one day, you cannot go to Mecca, you cannot pray in the mosque. But who will be told today, and they will be going to say, no, we must pray. No, Islam wants you, ad-dararu yuzal. That's the maxims, the hardship. The thing has to be removed. So if going to the mosque, praying in the mosque, praying in congregation is going to create the hard problem for you, حفظ النفس مقدم على حفظ بقية الكليات. The protection of your life has to be first before any other protections. I don't agree with those people who are saying حفظ الدين should come before حفظ النفس. No, believe me, حفظ النفس has to be before حفظ الدين, because there is no deen without nafs. There is no deen without there is no aql without nafs. There is no mal, there is no wealth without the nafs. There is no nasr without the nafs. The nafs come first, and it has to be first. That's why we have been allowed not even to say kalimatul kufr illa man ukriha wa qalbuhu mutma'innu bil iman. When you have been forced that if you don't do this, we are going to take you, we are going to kill you. All these prohibited items will be allowed for you to go because we want you to protect the nafs, to protect the life. So anything will be going to put your life in danger or the life of others in danger, Islam has made it clear for you and had made it easier for you. Do not get frustrated. If I'm not able to go to pray in the mosque today, I will be praying in the mosque tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, by the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Do not get frustrated. If you have been deprived, you have not been to be able to do these things. Get taken because we need you to be around. We need you to be more, to be hardworking for whatever is going to happen to you. So these legal maxims, we have to make use of them now. The time for scholars, for Ruswan and others, just go back to this legal maxim, read them several times. Sheikh Amin, go back to these things and get many of these things. You will get answers to many of the questions that have been raised around. Do not just be going to be, don't bother Imam Abu Hanifa, don't bother Imam Shafi'i, don't bother Imam Ahmad, don't bother Imam Malik, don't bother all of this Imam, because they are, let them rest where they are today. It is time for you to make I want you to be somebody who will be leaving behind him what these people left behind them. You will be able to do it. Imagine if Abu Hanifa, Malik, Shafi'i, they just decided to follow and to stay and to bother Malik all the time. Would we know? Would it be possible for us to get to know there is a school of Imam Shafi'i? If imagine Shafi'i was with Malik's student for 9 years, he was living with him in his house, and he was learning from him, and he was just like that, and he ended up to be the same thing for Imam Ahmad. He was a student of Imam Shafi'i, and he was all the time with him, but he ended up to get the learning for things. And then you have seen Imam Malik, Imam Abu Hanifa living in the same time, the same era, but each of them was trying to give the best, to do his best to help the Muslims to have a better understanding of religion. So it is your duty, my duty, and the duty for all of the learners. We have to try. Mujtahid, don't expect you to be perfect one. Don't expect you to be rightful in every single thing. Allah had, Prophet ﷺ had said, إِذَا اجْتَهَدَ الْمُجْتَهِدُ أو إذا اجتهد الحاكم فأصاب فله أجران وإذا أخطأ فله أجر واحد. He expected you to do mistake. He expected you to be wrong sometime. That's why even you've been wrong, but you've been rewarded for it. That mujtahid when you reach that level, and then you can reach that level through the education, through this learning, through the research that you are going through. You might get the right one. Allah will reward you twice. Because you get the right, you'll be rewarded for that. And then because you did do effort, that you'll be rewarded for that one. The second, but if you might be wrong. Don't get shame when sometimes I have given a fatwa. Sheikh Amin has given a fatwa sometime, and it happened that the time goes on, he realized that fatwa was not the right one. Please come up and just say, this one we can just correct it. It was a mistake. It has been proven. Do not take your fatwas as a Quran itself. It's the only Quran, there's no mistake at all. But your fatwa and mine, sometimes they stand for, and then we should stand for corrections and should accept. We just do our best. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will help us to get this one. So this is the second thing that we have to go for it. The third one, if you may allow me, Mr. Chairman, I have to just say this one. Maqasid al-Sharia, the objective of Sharia. You have the five main objectives that we do have. We talk about the nafs, hifz al-deen, hifz al-aqil, hifz al-mal, hifz al-nasl, hifz al-irad. Not only these five, they are the examples for us. They were meant for us to be. We could just go for 6, for the 7, for the 8. The freedom, what do you call it? The honor, the prosperity, and many other things could be today. The security, it could be considered as one of the objectives of Sharia. That protection of the security, your security, my security, the mankind's security, the security around of us, that could be also today the move. And we have this maqasid. Every single things we do in our life, there must be an objective for it. There could be objectives, but at least you must have 1 or 2. If we say you pray, there must be an objective behind the prayer. Why in the salat tanha anil fahsha wal munkar wal baghi la'allakum tadhakkarun. When you give sadaqah, when you give zakat, you pay your zakat. خذ من أموالهم صدقة تزكيهم وتطهرهم بها. When you go for Hajj, لعلكم تتقون. When you go fasting, لعلكم تتقون. When you do every single thing here, you must know, as a human being, when I'm talking to mind, I have had in mind some objectives, what I'm looking for it in my speech, what I want to reach, I want to get from out of the speech. So these objectives need to be brought before us. To know, sometimes if the hukum, the legal ruling, is not helping you to achieve the objectives, then you have to postpone the application, you have to postpone the implementation, the application of the legal rulings. For instance, Salatul Jama'ah in Masjid, one of the main objectives of the congregational prayer, that we need to meet each other. We need to share, we need to shake hands, we need to get to know, to be close to one another. Today, that objective will not be possible for us in the era of Corona. The Corona did not allow us to do this because we are going to spread the sickness. Instead of getting together, instead of strengthening each other, we are going to weaken each other. Because when we get sick, we will not be able to go to the mosque. And then we get the sick, we're not going to stand up. Then the objective, which is, this is talaqi, wahda, this is not going to be possible. Then congregational prayer has to be postponed, not to be cancelled, not to be deleted, not to be something like this. Because many of the objectives of this one, we could not be able to achieve it. So brothers and sisters, when you look at this, you will see Islam never ever prohibited an item without giving you the alternative. When you say zina haram, what should you, if you, okay, zina is haram, what should you go for zawaj? When you say riba haram, would you go for it? You go to al-bay', transaction. When you say injustice is haram, dhulm, al-adl. So every single thing is prohibited in Islam. You will find next to it which is permitted. If you are not able to say this one to the people, you are just keep saying haram, haram, but you don't say which is halal, halal. Don't blame Islam if Islam is not able to say and to answer the questions, the problem that we are faced with. So after after Corona, our thinking.
Assalamu alaikum. I think Dr. Sano. Thank you so much, Dr. Sano. I think his voice cut a little bit, but thank you so much for his wonderful talk. Now, due to the time limit, we will directly move to our third speaker, and he's going to speak for the intersection between theory and the practice of Muslims and Islamic groups during this period of time. So let's welcome Sheikh Muhammad Amin. He's a Muslim scholar, mentor, and founder of Darul Qasim, an institute of traditional Islamic higher learning headquartered in Glendale Heights, suburb of Chicago. Sheikh Amin is active advocate of the classical Sunni tradition of Islamic scholarship and passionate promoter of traditional Islamic sciences.
Yeah, you get me now?
Sorry.
Yes.
Yes.
Me now.
Okay, you're back now.
Yeah, I'm back now. I'm saying, the last things, maybe the micro will help me to finish with this.
Can you just finish soon, Dr. Sano? Yeah, can you just finish?
Yes.
Soon?
Yeah, I'm finishing with this.
Yeah.
The fourth one is ma'alat al-af'al. That you have to take into account the consequences of any things for prohibition or permission. Sometimes prohibition, if the consequence is going to be worse than the prohibition itself, then prohibition should not be allowed. Permission, if the consequences should be there, I would just, the Imam Ibn Taymiyyah, one day he was just like Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, they asked him, we in Medina, why don't finish with the hypocrite? If you know the hypocrite, all hypocrites are considered to be unbeliever, because hypocrisy is above the kufr. So Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu, why don't kill them? He said the consequences, the people will end up to say, Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu, he's killing his people, his friends. Inna Muhammad yaqtulu ashaba. I cannot kill them. What to do? I have to live with them. And when the time goes on, I may end up to get them to my side. Brothers and sisters, with these four principles, I think we'll be able to get answers to most of the cases, to most of the issues that will be raised after Corona. And let us have to be relevant. We have to be relevant. We must be relevant. And we have no choice but to be relevant to our communities, to the humanity, to the mankind. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sano. And thanks for a wonderful contribution. Let me continue to introduce Sheikh Amin. As I just said, he's a promoter of traditional Islamic science and methodologies. And more important for today, actually, he's special in bioethics. You know, considering the COVID-19 what's happening, I'm sure his both Islamic background and bioethic background will help us to understand this phenomenon and respond to this better. Now, please welcome Sheikh Amin.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina wa Nabiyyina wa Mawlana Muhammad wa barak sallam. Jazakumullah khair, Sheikh Rizwan and Dr. Sanu. MashaAllah, very inspirational. And hopefully we can take some of the advice that they have given us, mashallah. As our moderator has said here, I want to hopefully try and engage some of the medical doctors here on this panel so that they have something also to contribute and talk about and discuss, inshallah. So at Darul Qasim, which is the institution that I'm at, I founded it, alhamdulillah. We do have a medical group of about 17 medical doctors who work with us on bioethics, and it's a formidable group, mashallah. And we do understand the urgency of Islam and Islamic law when it comes to every issue in life, especially now with the pandemic and also the virus. So I'm going to talk to you straight up about this and see if we can help each other and understand how I think Islamic bioethics should be, inshallah, implemented in this pandemic. Well, let me see if I can share the screen. Where's the screen here? Yeah, this one, right? This one. So this is Islamic jurisprudence and pandemics. What we feel.
Dr. Sheikh, we could not see your screen. Can you share screen and then point to your PowerPoint? Yeah, you have to open your PowerPoint, then share. Yeah. Okay.
Now
yes, now we got it. Thank you.
Great. Wonderful. Technology does work sometimes. MashaAllah. Alhamdulillah. So I just want to say as a preamble that in matters of taqleed, we don't follow Abu Hanifa necessarily in the furu', in the subsidiary conclusions. We follow Abu Hanifa only in his usul and in his methodology. That's what the madhab is. So we still need his usul because we're not, I don't think any of us are smart enough to go into the nusus and recreate usul for ourselves. Those usuls are of two types. One are those that are contextual, and the second are those that are contextual. So when we use the contextual qawaid, secondary considerations, then we are able to use that for dispensing, right, using the medical term, dispensing a fatwa, which is very different from the actual hukum in the madhab. So in times of need and pandemics and desperation, a mufti is allowed to give you a fatwa where he's going to consider what Dr. Sanu and Sheikh Rizwan was saying about the maqasid, so that life is facilitated. But that doesn't mean to say that's the actual rule in Islam, because the actual rule in Islam takes an ideal. What is the ideal in Islam? That we say, look, what is the ideal in pork? What is the ruling on pork? What is the hukum on pork? It is haram, period. If, God forbid, there's a situation where somebody is dying and he needs to eat a little bit of pork, غَيْرَ مُتَجَانِفٍ لِإِثْمٍ, without going towards sin, then there will be no sin on him. فَلَا إِثْمَ عَلَيْهِ, there will be no sin on him. But it doesn't change the hukum. The ruling on pork still remains that it is haram. In this contingency, which is allowed for that one particular person to consume enough so that it saves his life. الضرورة تقدر بقدرها. So there's a difference, I think, between what we believe is the hukum, the ideal ruling on an Islamic issue or any issue, and what is a contingency and what is dispensed as a prescription for the person in situations. So we must make a distinction between the two if we're going to progress. And I'll try and give you examples. In this pandemic, there's the issue of, say, many Muslims who are Hanafi, right? They are doctors. These are doctors in the trenches. They're dealing with COVID-19 patients day after day after day. And some of them were a bit concerned that the hospital administration may ask them to shave their beard because the mask is not fitting, or there's a certain danger if they have a beard and so on. Okay? So there, I think the way we need to address this is that, first of all, say, let's rethink how we frame the question. One is what we call here a reactive approach, that I am being asked and forced to shave my beard, otherwise I can't do my job. That's a very reactionary approach. The proactive approach would be to frame the question differently and say, look, I'm a Muslim, I want to practice the Sunnah, I love the Prophet ﷺ. Can you give me a suggestion as to what I should do without غَيْرَ مُتَجَانِفٍ لِإِثْمٍ? okay, without conceding sin. And that's why I framed a phrase here in our bioethics: first do no harm, and then with a Muslim, first do no sin. No harm, no sin. They go together in Islamic bioethics. So that should be at the top there, where you understand and appreciate our philosophy towards Muslim and Islamic bioethics, is that we have to ensure that we are in line with the maqasid, the objectives, but we're also in line with the akhirah, because you cannot detach the akhirah when you talk about Islam. And that is why we have the distinction between what is contextual and what is acontextual. Now, Islam considers contingencies as part of its legal structure. Okay? So there are rukhas, okay? There are concessions that Islam gives, that if you're in Ramadan and you're sick, you're not able to fast, then you may not fast. وَمَنْ كَانَ مَرِيضًا وَعَلَى سَفَرٍ فَعِدَّةٌ مِنْ أَيَّامٍ أُخَرَ. That is included in the body of jurisprudence. You don't need to go outside of the body of jurisprudence to get that concession or dispensation. Now, as new cases arise in this pandemic, and it's a very novel situation, and I agree that in this case, there perhaps is not, to Dr. Sanu's point, that I don't think there's a maqis alayh here. I don't think there's a precedent in Muslim history for this pandemic. I think this is a very novel situation, and we must use every tool available to us to come to certain solutions. But the solution should be considered only as twofold. One is a contingency plan that you dispense a fatwa. In this case, it is allowed. That is at the micro level. What I want to talk about today is the macro. What is the macro approach of the scientific community towards curing and healing? And that's where I believe that we need independent thinking and we need creativity. We need to do just more than say concede to the status quo and then let people just live their lives assuming there's no alternative and there's no halal solution. And for that, confident Islamic knowledge and tradition is must, and halal means for healing are best for people universally. So I'm going to give you a few diagrams here, a few charts here that you can look into what is now happening in the Muslim world outside of the pandemic. As I said, is a novel situation, and we will address that, and we are addressing that as we speak, and even in the future, inshallah. But I want to step back and go into the micro thinking. The philosophy of Islamic medicine is that what can a scientific community do as Muslim physicians to make halal available? Okay? If there's a halal alternative, or if there's no immediate halal alternative, then what do we do at the philosophical level? What do we do at the epistemological level? What do we do at the state level to make sure that we allow Muslims to consume halal? Just as it is binding on a government to develop the infrastructure for halal jobs and halal earnings, likewise, it is binding on the Muslim government to develop an infrastructure where there is halal sources and means of cure and healing. So here in this first one, you see it's very, very clear. These are ideals, by the way. Okay? So what is the current practice? Embryonic stem cells. Is there halal alternative? Well, in the industry, there is possibly a halal alternative, adult stem cells. And what is that? As you see on the right column, that we will now be using live stem cells from the person himself or herself, and that will make it very, very halal. So we don't need to ask the question, is embryonic stem cell halal or not? Because that's a defeatist attitude. If there is a vaccine which only has halal ingredients, and you have another vaccine which has haram ingredients, then there's no reason why you should use the haram vaccine. It makes no Islamic sense, okay? As you see here in the kidney transplant. So these are, as I said, ideas. They may or may not correspond to what is the status quo in the medical field at this moment, but you can say that you don't need to illegally harvest human organs. Why are you asking the question, is organ transplant halal, when you haven't looked into the idea of providing a halal alternative in the first place? But that comes down to the governments. That comes down to the medical community and the scientific community, that they need to think creatively beyond acquiescing to the status quo. That the industry has provided us a means of cure, and sometimes, as you know, with organ transplants, there are complications post-op, which perhaps may define what's it called, the utilitarian view of fiqh. That the fiqh is based on some kind of utilitarian approach where, okay, if you say that, then what's the utility of understanding the post-op complications of organ transplant? And you have to put that into the discussion also. So now there's that. And so now the second one, you'll see, maybe even some more, what do you call it, examples as how we in this group try to understand that we are at the forefront here in the USA. The amazing scientific and medical talent that the Muslims have in the US and in the world is mind-boggling. It is stupendous. We have doctors who run hospitals. We have on this forum at Dar Qasim doctors who are the cream of the crop in their profession. They don't need to acquiesce to the status quo, and they don't need to be defeatist. They can be creative. They are intelligent. They're smart. All it needs is somebody to say, okay, I'm going to fund you, and let's see if we can find a halal alternative where we do not ask the question, is this halal or not? Because that question itself is defeatist. In the macro, I'm not talking about the fatwa on the ground as today. Obviously, if somebody's dying and he wants an organ transplant, or if he wants a blood transfusion, the mufti is not going to say, kill him. He's not going to do that, because that's a contingent. That's a dispensation. It's a pill. It's a prescription, but it's not the hukum. It's not what we as Muslims are looking for. Muslims have to go a step beyond what's available in the market, what's available in the industry, and then realize that we do have a responsibility, both as a jurist and as a medical scientist, to provide halal from the get-go, and from the very beginning, that we must think this way, that we are responsible for providing halal medicine and halal means of cures, instead of going reactionary to the mufti and say, this situation, what can you do? The mufti miskeen, he's going to say, my hands are tied, you want to save your life, and Dr. Sanu and Sheikh Rizwan, what's his name? Sorry, I'm getting your name wrong. I don't want it. Rizwan, there you go. They say that the priority is with life, the priority is not with deen, which is understandable. But as perhaps the macro, the science behind it, and the legal jurisprudence behind it demands that Muslims go forward. And they simply do not give in to the status quo. And think, look at this, smoking. Right. So you have smoking. Now what can you do with smoking? That if there was jurisprudence and fiqh, and then the doctors got together and they started advertising the harms of smoking in Muslim communities, that would make a tremendous impact and a difference to the number of lung cancer patients and the number of other the complications you see there on there. But that requires a community effort. That requires a different mode of thinking. That requires that you're thinking that preventive measures are much better than trying to cure something after the fact. So this is how I think we need that liver transplantation. Yeah. So this is something that is universal. Smoking is a universal problem. Okay. Alcohol is a universal problem. And most cases that come for for the liver complications are based on consumption of alcohol, etc. So as you all know, much more than I do. But if you were to lead a campaign from the Amr bil Ma'ruf wa Nahy anil Munkar perspective, that we are also obligated by the Quran to prove the Ma'ruf in not drinking and to prove the Munkar in drinking. And that is our responsibility as an ummah. And everybody who has a stake with this ummah should consider that they must do something, whether through advertising, whether through education, whether through testing, whether through data, whether through utilitarian, studies, whatever it takes. We have to drive the point home that we cannot allow society to kill itself just because somebody wants to have fun, because then you face the consequences. And the consequences that you get into this idea is now liver transplantation, is that halal? But you haven't addressed the cause. You're addressing the symptom. And the symptom is that the Mufti, as I said, will say, fine, if that's what you have to do, then that's what you have to do. But what does that mean for the society? What does that mean for the governments? What does that mean for the medical community? The medical community has to come up with a safe standard of life so that they are engaged with Muslim thinking. Okay? We are independent. We do have an independent philosophy. We have civilizational values based on the millah of Ibrahim alayhi salam, based on the ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. These values are superior. So in this pandemic, one of the issues that came up is washing. Washing hands constantly, frequently. And all the Muslims I talk to, they say, it's a joke. Muslims, they have to wash their hands at least 5 times a day. When they use the washroom, they're washing their hands. So a Muslim invariably is washing hands 10 times a day because of the universality of our hygiene, the oral hygiene, the personal hygiene, the hygiene of the place where you pray. These are all the sharait of salat. These are all the prerequisites for salat, meaning we can't go into ibadah without being this clean. This has to be promoted as a civilizational value. And when we come into contact with people, we tell them this is what we do as Muslims. We've always been raised to think clean. We are hygienic. And there are so many references in the Ummah of the past. And you look at Muslim Spain, you look at Turkey, you look at other places in the world, and you'll see nothing except hygiene in the culture. It's all hygienic. And we must appreciate this, that we should be on the offensive, not on the defensive, when we're promoting Muslim Islamic bioethics, because it is superior. And we must share this with other people. But the only way you can do that is if you think that way. If you don't think that way, you're not going to get there, because you've already acquiesced, resigned, submitted, to use the word Islam, you submitted to the status quo, and you're saying to everybody in the world that this is the only solution we have. And I say, no, that is the last resort. It's not the only solution. And finally, you'll see this one very clear and very obvious here, the porcine heart valves. We don't need them if there's a halal alternative. And this example of this drug here, heparin. So I was there in some country talking about Muslim bioethics, and they could not, for the life of me, see that for generations they've been using this drug, knowing that there's a halal alternative just because they weren't thinking Muslim. That's where the akhirah ties in with the jurisprudence. That if there's a halal alternative to this drug, why are you dispensing this haram? You don't need to. There's absolutely no need. There is no jawaz in fiqh for you to do that, that you have here chicken and you have here pork. So just because the pork is available doesn't mean to say we're going to overrule all our qawaid and all our maqasid and all our rules of fiqh and say, no, in this circumstance, because there's a contingency, you're going to go with the pork even though the chicken is available. That is ludicrous. Yeah, you can't do that. And on the pancreas transplantation, you see that on the graph there, and you see the heart transplantation. So what I'm saying in principle, that at Darul Qasim, when we study Islamic bioethics, we want to make it purely Islamic, that is based on a philosophy, is based on a model, is based on a paradigm, is based on epistemology, so that we get to understand what is the ideal hukum for the state, for the Muslim Ummah, irrespective of contingencies. Contingencies we already accommodate by default, because those are contingencies. That's part of law. So we don't need to really beat the drums of maqasid or beat the drums of whatever legal expediency. What we need to do now in this pandemic, and perhaps as a result of this, is come together on one platform as medical scientists and jurists, so that we can define for the ummah that this is a viable halal treatment and cure and healing process for these illnesses and diseases, as the Prophet ﷺ said, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when he sends down an illness, he sends down with it a cure. It is up to the Muslim scientist to go and look for the cure. He has to be proactive. He has to use his intelligence. And as I said, some of the panel members here, they're also in the USA, and they understand exactly the genius that we have within Muslim physicians in this country. They are smart people. They can do this. They don't need to think outside of the box. They need to expand the box. Make the box bigger, so you include what is halal in your dispensation, as you unfortunately have to resort to haram when you don't find a halal alternative. And that is my sincere advice, and hope that we all come together on one platform and try to understand that we as an ummah, kuntum khayra ummah, ukhrijat linnas, ta'muruna bil ma'ruf, wa tanhuna 'anil munkar. The ma'ruf is halal, the munkar is haram. We cannot allow people to be defeatist and reactionary and say, no. Now, when you go back to work today or tomorrow, you're going to dispense that haram pill or procedure or whatever, because you don't have an alternative. That is fine for the moment. At the micro level, it's not fine at the macro level. At the macro level, we are burdened by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we are held responsible to show the world that we have ma'ruf and we have munkar. And unless we start thinking this way as an independent body of scientists, where we're not even considering what's out there in the community or in the medical field. It should be totally abstract and totally independent of all other models and paradigms, and you will be surprised as to how these wonderful scientists in this country and other places in the world too come together, and you will find a cure that is purely halal, where you don't need to go to the mufti and ask him, is this halal or not? We should get rid of that attitude totally, because modern day medicine makes my life very difficult. Because you're always promoting haram in front of me. What you do is, this medicine is haram, this medicine. What do I say? You're going to save a life. Bismillah, save the life. You see that? But before, when Muslims were careful as to how they manufacture medicine and what kind of idea and philosophy they bring to the table for healing and cure. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the Shafi. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who heals. He's the one that cures. We have the perfect role model in Isa alayhi salam. Muslim doctors and non-Muslims doctors, they can't do what Isa alayhi salam did. What Isa alayhi salam did is that he revived the dead. That's in the Quran. Whether you make ta'wil of that, it doesn't matter. But what I'm saying is that we have a perfect role model. That in medicine, in the Quran, that they have hidayah, the prophets are role models. And when we look into the Quran, we find this role model in Isa alayhi salam.
Which we get back.
he'd find medical practice for us Muslims today. And if you want to have a role model for the patients, so the hospital has obviously doctors and patients, then you have the role model of Ayyub al-Islam. Ayyub al-Salam is the perfect role model for patients. All I'm saying is that when you find guidance in wahi, then you must use that as an asl. You must use that as a foundation. You must use that as a launching pad and go with it. Bismillah. And I think the more that we promote this idea, I think the more confident we will gain and the more we will be in line with what is traditional Muslim thinking, and that is kuntum khayra ummah. You are the best nation, and the proof is in the pudding. Sorry to excuse that.
Thank you very much, Sheikh Hamid. Thank you for sharing your bioethics knowledge. He made a perfect transition from theory of jurisprudence to our next panel, which will be hosted by Dr. Abbas about Muslim practice during the pandemic. Now, please, Dr. Abbas.
How do I get this?
Abbas?
We'll get rid of this.
Assalamu alaikum. Yeah. Just in the bottom, or you can go on the top, exit out. There is some trouble with our.
Sheikh Hamid, you can just stop sharing. There is a button there. You just click stop sharing, then you just get out of it. Yeah.
Oh, here, Sheikh.
Yes.
Go inside. Yeah. No, not that one, but the other one. Maybe.
Abbas, you can start. I think if you speak, the screen will get back.
Okay. Welcome to the second panel. It's about the practices during the pandemic. We have very prominent three scholars in this panel. Dr. Shaul Hamid Ibrahim from America, and Umar Rashid from South Africa, Dr. Islamuddin from UK. They will discuss, how the Sharia should be realigned and updated at the time of pandemic. I would like to introduce the first panelist, Dr. Shaul Hamid Ibrahim. He's an American medical epidemiologist, served as an adjunct professor in various universities. He served as the first U.S. health attaché to the 15th member of African Union and directed U.S. aid initiatives in West Africa. Dr. Ibrahim has advised the Saudi government, OIC, GCC during 2019-2013 Hajj that coincided with pandemic H1N1 influenza MERS outbreak. Working with OIC, Dr. Ibrahim helped during the polio vaccinations challenges in Muslim majority countries in the first Health Ministry Summit of OIC. He frequently contributes scientific alerts on Hajj and Umrah from the disease control perspective, including COVID-19. Dr. Shaul will explicitly talk on his article he published about the stopping of Umrah in Oxford Journal. Shaul, please.
Thank you very much, and Assalamu alaikum. Greetings to all of you. I hope you can hear me, right? Well, so I did not have much knowledge about the link between religion and medicine until I was looking at data on polio in 1998, that we saw that there were 4 countries with polio still uneradicated, and 3 of them were Muslim countries: Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Nigeria. And of course, India was included. And in India, about 80% of polio was among Muslim populations. So we looked into the reason, and we found people were hesitant to take vaccines because of the rumors that it was many of the reasons which has been mentioned by other speakers. It contains both products. It's a American ideology to sterilize Muslims and reduce Muslim populations, and various tragic misconceptions have been prevailing, especially especially among the our brothers and sisters with less access to education and who have more or less a blind and abstract interpretation of religion. So a couple of us in the US, we formed an entity called Working Group of Health of Muslim Populations, and we had access to the World Health Organization and lead entities, and we were able to bring fatwas related to that, and then starting with that on smoking and extending that experience to the Ebola outbreak, which I was assigned to Liberia and Mali, which is a majority Muslim country, Ivory Coast. So during the 2014 Ebola outbreak, we saw that about 20% of all Ebola cases were attributed to the burial practices among Muslims. That means the concept of washing the dead bodies and then our need to be participating in the burial process. Having said that, of course, the rapid burials we practice in the Muslim world is beneficial because you have less contact with the body fluids, but still that practice of washing of dead body, which is considered highly, how would you say, act of kindness or act of religiosity, was instrumental in Ebola transmission. And then so we both as researchers and scientists, as well as religious scholars, to bring out this fatwa, and that really helped. And I think the opportunity for success was that when the public health community and scientists join hands with the religious scholars, we are conveying a message that we as scientists, we are telling you this is bad for you. We as religious scholars, we are telling you that this is something which is not advisable as per the religion. It was most receptive to the population who have a deep faith in Islam, but they haven't had the opportunity like in many other countries, especially in some parts of Africa. They did not learn religion. They had this blind faith in what they have been told traditionally. They didn't have the madrasa infrastructure where they go and sit and learn hadith and everything. Most of the way they learn religion was oral tradition. You learn it from your parents or you serve in the family. So I think what COVID has brought us is an opportunity to once again focus attention on several challenges the Muslim world faces in the developing world. I'm not talking about, transplantation and stem cell research. I'm talking about unresolved issues like polio, now COVID, consanguinity-related marriages, for example, marriage between children of brothers and sisters, which is causing huge burden from sickle cell disease and other genetic disorders. A lot of them have been not addressed properly so far because they don't cause immediate death and people don't see. Nobody walks around saying that I have sickle cell disease, all these things. So some of them that is probably not how religion was formed. The purpose of religion, as we heard earlier, was that it is a conceptual basis which is subject to interpretation, and we go through the 5 principles out of avoiding harm. and necessity, and discussions about using pork products. So, and of course, if they are relevant to the customs of a community. So we have this broad conceptual basis in Islam, and then I think COVID brings another opportunity for us to open up the minds of people, and our people who have been benefited from having the knowledge, so that they can convey that knowledge further to other communities who did not have this opportunity to learn and understand religion as much as we would like to do, so that the many beneficial advisories in Islam, like breastfeeding, we have huge problem with child mortality in Muslim countries. We have problems with maternal deaths, people dying, women dying during deliveries. That is still the highest. About 30% of all the deaths are still in Muslim predominant countries, mostly in the African region, but other regions also have similar issues. We have conflicts. For example, the conflicts today in many of our Muslim countries are going to be the reservoirs or hotspots of COVID-19 and a lot of other diseases in the end. So we need to have some sort of treaties like the Geneva Convention concerning wars, that not only Muslims, everybody needs to have, but Muslim communities can bring up these concepts to the dialogue so that these countries will not remain as reservoirs or hotspots of future disease burden. Even if pandemic is contained in rich countries, pandemic in poor countries will make it unfeasible or infeasible for all other countries. Any COVID in any country is a COVID everywhere. That is a situation. And we don't want Muslim communities to be the last reservoirs or last frontiers of COVID. And it is not just COVID. We see that with polio now. We see with measles emerging. And of course, you can argue whether we should let diseases go through its course. That's a argument. I don't know who has the answer. Should we let everyone die, say 30% or 20% or 10% of the population die to benefit the rest of us, the survivors, to develop immunity? Those are probably beyond our turf to answer, but at least what we know, what works, I think we have an obligation to expand that knowledge to our communities, especially in poorer countries. In rich countries, we have a different dimension of argument. We talk about stem cell and other things, but in poor countries, it's much more basic prevention and elimination of conditions which has treatment. There is vaccine or a treatment, and that for many populations, it is unaffordable. We have a beautiful concept in Islam called zakat. And I think, that opportunity should be further exploited so that these medicines, not only medicines, also the concepts behind these medicines should be transmitted by our own communities. And that's why we were working with the OIC. We saw that OIC was the United Nations for Muslim countries. They can do a reasonable job of engaging the governments and countries and societies to bring an extra layer of affirmation that these things needs to be done, rather than hearing it from Western governments and Western health workers. When they hear from these recommendations from our own people, I think our own brothers and sisters will be more receptive to complying with the health recommendations. I think I would stop there and let others speak, and I would be happy to give my responses if there are any. Thank you.
Thank you so much for these practical measures, especially citing from your personal experience in Africa and other areas. Secondly, we have Dr. Rashid Umar. He has his religious studies from University of Cape Town, South Africa. Now he's working as a core faculty in University of Notre Dame. Notably, he is in the contributor in Islam in Muslim world, Macmillan, and please, Rashid Umar, it's your turn.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Nahmaduhu wa nusalli wa nusallim ala Rasulil Kareem. Amma ba'd. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Allow me to begin by commending the World Muslim Communities Council for this very inspirational initiative to explore the new requirements and horizons of Islamic jurisprudence in the context of the current coronavirus COVID-19 pandemic. I would like to make a brief preliminary remark and then move on to identify 4 practical jurisprudential, or what we might call fiqhi masail, or challenges that faces us as we enter the last third of this blessed month of Ramadan, and as we move closer to the Eid al-Fitr celebrations. The current global coronavirus pandemic is a difficult and exasperating time for everyone. But I am encouraged by the overwhelmingly positive manner and compassionate manner in which most Muslim leaders and institutions, and indeed ordinary believers, have courageously and have thoughtfully dealt with these challenging times. And some of our previous discussions is evidence to this fact. Masajid across the globe have temporarily closed their doors in response to the advice from public health officials to practice physical distancing in order to slow down the rate of the transmission of the coronavirus. For the first time in modern history, as the celebrated Adhan, the call to prayer, embraced a prophetic injunction which advises that in emergency conditions, the muazzin should call on Muslims to perform their ritual prayers, their salah, at home. It is indeed surreal to hear the muazzin proclaim from masjid loudspeakers across the world, Sallu fi buyutikum, Sallu fi rihalikum, pray, make salah in your homes. What has been reassuring and heartening is the fact that the overwhelming majority of ordinary Muslims have responded to this novel call by transforming their homes into sanctuaries and places of worship. That indeed is a positive sign and a clear indication that the ordinary Muslims across the globe are responsive to the changing circumstances in which we find ourselves, and that they are not unwilling to adapt their religious practices to measure up and to meet the new requirements and the new horizons of Islamic jurisprudence. Central to the positive and compassionate Muslim response to the coronavirus pandemic, as we have heard previously, is us drawing wonderfully on the maqasid al-sharia, the supreme objectives of Islamic law, and the qawa'id al-fiqhiyya, the various legal maxims, and chief among them has been the one of hifdh al-hayat or hifdh al-nafs, the preservation, the sanctity, and the protection of human life. And among the qawa'id, the chief principle that we have drawn upon, which we have heard before, is that of yusr or taysir, al-mashaqqa tajlib al-taysir. Instances of hardship elicits ease. Yuridu Allahu bikum al-yusr. Allah desires ease for you. Wala yuridu bikum al-usr. Allah does not desire for you difficulty. Now, given this positive and compassionate response by ordinary Muslims, by and large, there have been pockets of resistance. Given the fact that we have this positive and global response by ordinary Muslims, and the fact that the coronavirus COVID-19 pandemic will unfortunately be with us for a longer while, it is vital and critical for Muslim scholars, and in particular our fuqaha, our Muslim jurists of Islamic law, to be creative in mining the rich sources of our great Islamic legal heritage and to respond to the exigencies of our time. There are many challenges facing Muslims as we endeavor in this context to fulfill our Islamic obligations and to perform our acts of devotion for the love of Allah to the best of our abilities in the context of the coronavirus pandemic. I would like to identify 4 such immediate challenges which is going to confront us in the next couple of days and weeks. The first one is that Muslim world juristic or fiqh councils, they need to deliberate, they need to pronounce on whether the obligatory zakat, one of the fundamental arkan or pillars of Islam, the alms tax, may be discharged to assist the many people who have been left destitute and needy as a consequence of the loss of their jobs and income due to the lockdown policies implemented by many governments across the globe. So what we have is that we have individual fatwa, but we have not had, as far as I know, a World Muslim Council giving a clear fatwa with regard to this. The second question raised by our current context is perhaps a question of ikhtilaf, as many of these issues are. Is the permissibility of embracing hisab al-falaki, astronomical calculations, as a legitimate shari'i method for determining the end of the lunar month of Ramadan. In this regard, the European Fiqh Council and the Fiqh Council of North America have for some time now been advocating the shari'i legitimacy of this position, and there are a number of other ulama groupings. In the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, this mas'ala now, especially if we do this in a time as we have today, where we can scientifically determine this astronomically. So this is a second issue that I think needs to be considered by a World Muslim Juristic Council. A third urgent issue that confronts ordinary Muslims is a very practical one. And this is, I think, the mandate that we have been asked to speak about. What are the practical fiqh challenges emerging out of this pandemic? A very ordinary issue, and following public health guidelines, given the fact that most of our masajid will be closed. For example, should Muslims, because they cannot go to the masjid, should they forego the Eid Salah? Or is it permissible for families in their homes under the current conditions to perform the Eid al-Fitr Salah at home, and perhaps to listen afterwards to online khutbahs or nasihas, words of advice broadcasted from their local masajid? Last but not least, I want to place the issue that when Ramadan ends, we will be entering what is known as the Musimul Hajj, the season of Hajj, the sacred month, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala proclaims in Surah Al-Baqarah 7, Al-Hajju Ashhurum Ma'lumat. The pilgrimage shall take place during the well-known months. These well-known months, immediately as Ramadan ends, Eid al-Fitr is on the 1st of Shawwal, the month of Shawwal, the month of Dhul Qa'idah, the 11th month, and the month of Dhul Hijjah, the 12th month. These are the sacred months.
There's a certain angle if I twist, it hurts. Otherwise,
So immediately after Ramadan, many Muslims prospective pilgrims, Hujjaj, will be faced with the question as to whether they should proceed to make their final preparations with their intention for the performance of the annual pilgrimage. To find a vaccine or a cure. In the next 2 to 3 months. Moreover, chapter 3, ayah verse 97 says, "What lillahi 'ala an-nasi hajjul bayt." In consultation, in this regard, it is instructive that in a hadith, the beloved Prophet Muhammad, may Allah's everlasting peace and blessings be upon him, was performing the tawaf around the sacred Kaaba. And he was speaking to it. He said, "How sacred is your sight? How sacred is your fragrance, the air around you? But I swear by Allah, in whose hand is my life, that the sanctity of the life of a believer is more sacred than you, the Kaaba. This is a very, very instructive hadith. In conclusion, then, I have raised only a few of the many contemporary masail or concrete fiqh issues that have become manifest as a result of the coronavirus pandemic. It will require the collective ijtihad and deliberation, not by individual scholars, but by world councils of Muslim jurists together and in shura with one another. The by and large positive and compassionate response by the global Muslim Ummah to the COVID-19 pandemic, as I have said, is a clear indication that the Muslim masses are ready to embrace novel and progressive interpretations of our traditional fiqh legacy based on the authentic sources of the Sharia. The question is, do we have wise Muslim jurists who will be able to respond to the challenge of our times by providing us with courageous leadership? Shukran for your patience with me. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you so much for these remarkable words. Especially, I think you have experience in both places. You were in US and now came to your own South Africa, especially it's time of practice and matters. Thank you so much. Now we have another scholar, Dr. Islamuddin, who has completed his PhD from School of Law at Middlesex University. He also teaches classical and contemporary Islamic law. Let's hear from him, please.
Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah wa ba'd. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah and welcome. First and foremost, I want to thank the World Muslim Communities Council for organizing this webinar on the very important topic of Islamic jurisprudence or fiqh amid pandemic times. And I'm very honored to be speaking among all the esteemed guests that we've had, all the speakers before. May Allah reward each and every one of them for their efforts. And in effect, I will, in my topic, while speaking about the fiqh of religious practice, more or less reiterate some of the key points that they've mentioned. So my topic is the fiqh of religious practice during a pandemic in light of COVID-19. Now, as a lecturer, as well as an imam, I've seen the impact of COVID-19 on congregational religious practice and the need to reevaluate this practice due to this pandemic. As we can see, even to this date, the COVID-19 virus, the number of cases are still very high globally. So here in the UK, the numbers are still very high to the point the government is still concerned. The number of cases are high, as well as the number of fatalities, the people dying from the COVID-19. And so far, worldwide, there is no cure. So the response globally by various governments has been one of lockdown. So where people isolate themselves in their homes and only go out if there's a necessity, and also to avoid public gathering or social isolation. And as we can see, this is unprecedented in recent times, in this modern era, for people to live in this way, subhanAllah. When we live in modern times where we're so used to being a global community, to travel, and subhanAllah, we're now put in this situational lockdown. So the question that I'm going to answer is, what is the fiqh of religious practice during a pandemic? As we all know, the religious practice is about believing and then practicing those things that we've been commanded to practice. So the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, Bunya al-Islam ala khams. Islam is built upon 5. The first is the shahada, as we know. And then thereafter, there are practical things that we need to do. So the prayer, to give zakah, to do hajj, perform hajj, and to fast in this blessed month of Ramadan that we're in at the moment. So how can we reevaluate these practices in light of the pandemic? Because after all, practicing these pillars is what makes us Muslim, is it not? That's what it highlights, the fact that you believe and you practice these pillars. So to understand this, I'm going to discuss 3 principles first, and then I'm going to explain how we can reevaluate our practice of these 5 pillars, or 4, because 4 of them are practical, and the shahada is one which is about iman, faith. So I may reiterate what our esteemed speakers have already said before, but I think the first principle that we need to truly appreciate is that which is known as the Maqasid al-Sharia. Maqasid al-Sharia as a foundation, which literally means the higher objective of the Sharia. And the reason revelation was to us. We find that the Maqasid of the Sharia is the preservation of 5 key areas. Number 1, which is the nafs, which is the life, the deen, which is religion, then nasab, lineage, aql, intellect, and mal, wealth. Now you can see all 5 areas the Sharia says we should preserve this. But the highest priority becomes nafs, life. Because unless you're alive, how can you take up the other aspects of your sanctity? So the top priority becomes the preservation of hifd nafs. Okay, and what we find because of this principle, and knowing that the Sharia legislates this, out of necessity or durura, what is normally unlawful becomes lawful for us. What is normally unlawful, which we say is haram, becomes lawful, as in halal for us. So for example, some foods which we're not normally allowed to eat, or some drinks we're not allowed to normally have, but out of necessity, because we don't have anything other than this, then our Sharia permits for us under this principle to safeguard your life to have this, subhanAllah. So that is one of the first principles that we need to appreciate, especially when it comes to reevaluating the practice of fiqh during this pandemic. The second principle, which I've heard already be mentioned, mashallah, is that from the hadith, la darara wa la dirara. Don't harm yourself and don't harm others. Don't harm yourself. Don't put yourself in a situation where you can cause harm to yourself. So, for example, if we treat this pandemic like a plague, we know from our scriptures that when there is a plague, then you should not go anywhere near this, and you're in that plague, not to leave. Why? Because to go towards something like this can cause you harm, but if you already have this affliction, to go to others can spread this. So by isolating ourselves, first we prevent harm to ourselves by contracting this COVID-19, and the second thing is that we can avoid harming others, and this is important to appreciate. I'll give you an example. In the UK at the moment, the highest number of fatalities and the casualties from this COVID-19 are in the care homes. So these are the elderly, the vulnerable people. And it's not because they're going out, they're actually isolated. It's because other people are coming to them, and they themselves may not be affected by the COVID-19 virus, but they're able to go and spread it to others. So don't harm yourself, don't harm others. It's very important, a principle. And that's why the current government policies worldwide, where communities are told to isolate and they're in lockdown, is not contrary or does not contradict Islamic principles at all, because this is the principle that we have in Islam. So we can see one of the other things that we've seen and it's been mentioned is the issue of when people die, the janazah, to do the ghusl for the mayyit. We've seen that even in the UK, one of the first problems that happened amongst us, and the question that was asked amongst all of the fiqh councils and the imams and the ulama, the scholars and the fuqaha, is what do we do if we cannot wash the bodies? So some of the early responses that don't harm yourself, don't harm others. And a lot of the bodies were not washed, but literally buried. And thereafter, when the facilities came, it was announced that now we have the necessary PPE or protective equipment to now wash, and so it's facilitated again. So again, the principle of don't harm yourself and then don't harm others. The third principle that I want to mention, and this is another important one, and as you can see again, we are talking about that which is within our tools of fiqh or jurisprudence already. The third principle that I want to mention is this one, where we have something when we are commanded as being the azima and the ruksa. Azima, the original request, and the ruksa being the permit. And it's very important for us to understand that whenever there is a talab, a request from the Sharia for us to do an action, you will almost certainly find there is some compensation or some sort of a permit, a ruksa, okay, to not do the act if there's a certain circumstance arise. So for example, we know in the month of Ramadan, fasting is something prescribed from every Muslim who's sane and who's healthy, yes, and able to, yes. But because of the fact some people, they are ill or they're unable to fast, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allows, and our Sharia allows them not to fast. Okay. So similarly, we can say in this current pandemic, if you're amongst the vulnerable and to fast in this case, could cause you to lower your immune system to make you more vulnerable, then again, it's something that they need to seek advice with regards to fasting. So we have the principle of the azima, which is the original request, and the talab. And so, and the talab, which is the original request, and the azima, which is to do the act, and then the ruksa, which is the permit. So it's like a concession or a permit not to do. So another similar example with regards to fasting is we're told to fast, but if you're musafir, you don't. So if you're a traveler, because of the hardship of traveling, you don't have to fast. So again, this is what is known as the ruksa. So we can apply this to many other the pillars. And what I want to say is that if we apply these three principles, the first one, maqasid of the Sharia. Secondly, the principle of avoiding harm. And the third one, that there is a ruksa available, even though Allah originally requested to do something, or the Sharia requested to do something, that if we're prevented from doing a ritual act in any way, we should not feel any haraj, any hardship. We may yearn to do a ritual act, but the fact is we've been prevented, and there's something according to Sharia that allows us to take another course of action. And that is something which is beautiful for us to understand. Why? It means that, alhamdulillah, we are still able to practice our religion. And I'm going to explain now by going through some of the 5 pillars. So firstly, one of the major concerns is the issue of the Hajj coming up very soon, although we're still in the month of Ramadan. And the fact that will the Haramain and Mecca and all that be open to allow the people to make Hajj? I mean, as it stands at the moment, I don't believe it will be open. So the question is now, is this something that requires something totally new from our fiqh to resolve this matter? Or do we already know, as already been explained, that Hajj is something that is obligatory on the people if they have the capability? And the capability are 3 things. We said, firstly, to have wealth, and then to have good health, and then safe passage. Now, if any one of those are blocked in any way, then it no longer becomes an obligation. So again, you shouldn't feel any hardship in not being able to perform it, though you would yearn to do it, because you may have good health, and you may have a lot of wealth, disposable wealth to hand. But the fact that you're not able to travel safely is, again, removes that obligation. So it's within our fiqh already, and removes the obligation. And also you're practicing the greater principle of not harming yourself and not harming others by gathering again. So this is a way of understanding the Hajj that is coming up, inshallah. Again, we mentioned already about the fasting, that the people who are sick are already excused from the original revelation that was sent from the Sharia, that if you're sick, you're allowed not to fast. But maybe in this COVID period, if you're one of class amongst the vulnerable, you maybe need to take more precaution and watch yourself to regards to if you are able to fast or not. Unfortunately, I've heard some cases myself here where people who are amongst the class vulnerable who have fasted and their immune system has gone down, and now they are seeking, and some of them are in hospital. May Allah grant them shifa. Ameen. So that is regarding to fasting. How can we stop this, which is the second pillar of al-Islam? Indeed, Salah is the second pillar of al-Islam, but Salah is like an obligation for you to pray the 5 times Salah. And if you're prevented from praying in Jama'ah, all that it does thereafter, it doesn't negate your Salah in any way. All it does is diminishes the reward that you wanted. Remember, you wanted the extra reward to pray in congregation. And so if you're prevented, you're still able to fulfill that pillar. So the question now becomes, what about the salahs like Jum'ah and the salahs like Eid? Now, Jum'ah, again, even from the very beginning, our fiqh allows that if you're a musafir traveling, then there is no Jum'ah. It's not an obligation upon you. But if you're prevented, and again, if you're prevented to go to join a Jama'ah, whether it be bad weather or whether it be some harms in your way, then again, this obligation is removed from you. So within our fiqh, we have all of these sort of concessions and permits. So now another question is regards to the congregational prayer is the Taraweeh. What happens? It's as though like a big calamity is for the Ummah, we're not able to pray the Taraweeh in Jama'ah. It's as though like the Taraweeh is not accepted. But again, if we go back to our fiqh, we realize that Taraweeh in the first place was practiced by the Prophet ﷺ in congregation very rarely. In fact, the Prophet ﷺ did it 3 times, and thereafter he stopped. And when he was asked, Ya Rasulullah, why are you not praying in congregation again, this Taraweeh? the Prophet ﷺ said, I fear it will become farad, obligatory. So even to this day, the Tarawih is not obligatory for you to pray, especially if you're not able to pray in Jama'ah in a masjid, you can still pray at home because it is a voluntary prayer and it's very virtuous for you still to do. So again, our fiqh has resolved all of the issues because it's from the very beginning of the legislation, there's always been the azima, the original rule, and then the ruksa. Okay, and there's always been the practice from the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, which we can follow as an example. So this is talking about congregational prayer. I think definitely, and I'm going to reiterate what all of our esteemed speakers have said already. That during this current pandemic, the COVID pandemic, isolation is very important and is vital. Zakah. Zakah, as we know, the first category, that verily the zakah is for the poor and the needy. And Islam defines who are poor, which are the most needy of the people, and then needy thereafter. There's a different scale. So the priority is always to give to the poor people first, then the needy, but they're under a similar category of those that are needy of our wealth. So even recently, I had somebody who's from abroad, he messaged me and he said, my uncle, who never has ever received zakah, rather was somebody who always used to give zakah, but because of this current lockdown, he's not able to earn anymore. His livelihood is virtually over a week gone. He used to have his own business, there's no longer trade. Can I now give him zakah? And of course, this is where we now reevaluate where our money of zakah goes. Because of the condition, people who never received zakah before are now eligible for zakah. And because we don't know when the give them medicine that would help safeguard them as well. So again, a re-evaluation of practicing our pillars of Islam, the fiqh of religious practice. But sometimes we forget that we've always had this one tool that I want to mention before I conclude. We've always had this tool of ijtihad, which is where the scholars will exert effort to try to apply the ruling and to their best of understanding. And even at this stage, evaluating our religious practice or our fiqh. And Islam generally, holistically, is a rational religion. It very much looks out for the well-being of humanity, accepts that we have a human nature to us. But we need to, as scholars, we need to, as ulama, to when a situation arises, to stand up and lead. Stand up and lead and advise and disseminate all of this heritage that we have and all of the tools that we have. And even if there's a new matter, we have ijtihad to deal with this. So it's now a time for worldwide councils to stand up, national councils to stand up, and even local ulama to come out, if they're invited to come out and now to lead a people, because now is the time for their response, to come out and to explain. And I think that is one of the big duties that we have. And that's why I'm very pleased to be part of this webinar today. And may I accept everyone's effort. Alhamdulillah, I've very much enjoyed all the other speech. And thank you for listening. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you so much for this wisdom of words. Our three panelists, we were discussing about the practices. There is no doubt that we have realigned or updated our jurisprudence on our practices, especially for the prayer, fasting. But the two panelists, especially the Dr. Islamuddin and Dr. Rashiduddin, they raised the question that about the Hajj. So I would like to ask Dr. Shahul Ibrahim. He was advising the Saudi government for the Hajj in 2009 and 2019, and especially for stopping Umrah this time. What will be the take? What will be the advice or you have given or you are going to give, I'd like to hear for that.
Thank you very much. And I'm sorry I didn't touch on the topic earlier, and probably that is the reason I got into this panel. Yes, I was in Saudi Arabia as a U.S. advisor from a disease control perspective in 2009 when we had the H1N1 pandemic, no comparison to COVID. So how the Saudis do this thing, and which is probably not known to many non-medical audiences, that it is going through a huge iterative process where we have workshops with the US Centers for Disease Control, the World Health Organization, the Public Health UK, the European Centers for Disease Control, the Ministry of Hajj, Ministry of Interior, Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We sit and discuss, just like how the WHO came to declare the pandemic, the COVID as a pandemic. It is same rigorous exercise we go through before making a determination. Even, for example, there is a requirement for vaccination for meningitis, for polio. And these requirements came from this, interactive, evidence-based development of guidelines, which the Saudi government unanimously follows. And this is not a one-day decision. It is not a one-person decision. It is an evidence-based decision. So what we did was that through the 6-month process, we evaluated every day scientific reports and reports from these entities, whether what will be the burden on Hajj, what will be the mortality if Hajj happens, what are the implications of canceling Hajj. There are economic, there are religious, geopolitical issues. We consider all these things, and as we heard over and over again from all the speakers today, global good overrides in those decisions. Public health good. It is not one person's wish to go to heaven. That was not the message. I can tell you one example. When I was there, at the MENA hospital, we had a woman, elderly, probably in 80s, who needed transfusion because of exposure to heat, and she refused transfusion, intravenous fluids. She said, "I came to die here, and don't transfuse me." And the doctor jokingly said, "You will go to heaven, and I will go to jail." So this is the kind of situation. People, not all the pilgrims are coming with the idea of global good. And so it is our duty to guide them and inform them that, while Hajj is our individual responsibility, our global good and our consideration for other human beings override those considerations. And this has been repeatedly pointed out. So in 2010, Saudi government institutionalized this experience. They have 1,400 years of experience running health services for the Hajj. We had extensive transmission of influenza in 1957. Again, this is not documented evidence based on genetic studies. These are anecdotal evidence. And evidence from transmission of polio and meningitis. So based on that, they instituted this discipline called mass gathering medicine, and World Health Organization Center for Excellence was established that is delegated to monitor the outbreaks continuously across the world. There is a group of researchers, including myself, who watch for these outbreaks. So we wrote and informed the Saudi decisions during the Zika outbreak and the Ebola outbreak, the yellow fever transmission patterns. We look at vaccine availability. For example, last year there was an issue with the meningitis vaccine availability from India. So all these things are deliberated and looked in carefully from all angles, as I mentioned. And most likely, as we see things moving this year, it is possible that Hajj may not be held unless we have useful vaccine or a treatment available which can be easily administered, or the virus takes a different turn and becomes less significant in terms of its virulence or transmissibility. But if it sustains as we see now, it is most likely that Hajj may not be held this year. I think I'll stop there.
Members and the team who stream our program, thank you so much. Let's hope to see in other occasions. Thank you so much.
Thank you.